Once upon a time, in a kingdom that had almost forgotten how to dream, there lived a young woman everyone called Cinderella. No one used her given name anymore. It had worn away slowly, like gold rubbed thin. Her stepmother said it was because she was always dusty from the cinders by the kitchen fire. But the truth was simpler and sadder. No one in that house wanted to remember that she had once belonged to anyone else, or anywhere else. The house itself was large but strangely quiet. Once it had echoed with her father's deep laugh and the scratch of his pen in the study. It echoed with the clatter of servants in the kitchen and music on winter evenings when he'd invite friends to dine. Now the room stood mostly unused, long corridors lined with portraits that watched and remembered more than any living soul within those walls. Cinderella's days were measured out by small, repetitive tasks: sweeping ash from the hearth, polishing the same banister until it shone, washing the same windows, kneading bread, carrying water. They were the kind of tasks that made time blur and fold. So that morning and evening sometimes felt as if they were breathing in and out of the same moment. Her stepmother, Lady Aurelia, was a woman made of steel and porcelain, beautiful, poised, and cold in a way that never raised her voice but still made everyone in the room feel smaller. She had two daughters of her own, Celeste, sharp-eyed and restless, and Portia, soft-faced but sour, like milk left too long in the sun. They were not wicked in the loud storybook sense. They did not cackle or plot poisonings, or drag Cinderella by the hair. Their cruelty was quieter, comments dropped like pins, chores added like small weights, kindness withheld with practiced ease. "Cinderella, you missed a spot there," Celeste would say, pointing to an invisible smear on a perfectly clean table. "Cinderella, you don't mind doing my mending, do you?" Portia would ask, already dropping a pile of dresses into her arms. "Cinderella," Lady Aurelia would add, with that cool, distant smile, "you should be grateful to have a home at all." And Cinderella would bow her head, answer softly, "Yes, stepmother," and keep moving, like a river that had learned to flow around stones. At night, when the house had finally gone still, Cinderella would sit by the kitchen fire, wrapped in a thin shawl that still held the faintest scent of lavender from years ago. The glow of the embers painted her skin in warm orange and soft shadow. These were the hours that belonged to her. She would lean her head against the rough stone of the fireplace and allow herself to remember. Her mother's hands, warm and clever, teaching her how to braid her hair. Her father's voice, telling her stories of distant lands and promising that one day he'd show them to her. Promises that had ended with an unexpected illness, a hurried burial, and then, later, a second marriage that had felt, even as a child, like the closing of a door. Sometimes, when the night was particularly still, she'd rise and push open the back door of the kitchen. Outside, the world was cool and smelling of damp earth and faded flowers. The garden had once been magnificent, but now it was half wild. Rose bushes had grown tangled. Ivy climbed where it hadn't been invited. She'd walk barefoot over the cold stones and lift her gaze to the sky, studying the stars. She did not wish for grand things, not jewels or palaces or princes. Her wishes were smaller, more precise. A day where she could wake and know she was free to choose what to do with her hands. A conversation where someone listened to her as if what she said mattered. A moment in which she could breathe without fear of being called, chided, or corrected. Sometimes she imagined leaving, just walking away, finding work in some town as a seamstress or a maid in another, kinder house. But there were debts tied to her father's estate, and the law was not made for girls with no money and few connections. The world outside felt as distant as the moon, so instead she stayed. She swept. She sang under her breath when no one could hear, and she dreamt quietly, like a candle burning low. One morning, as mist clung to the windows, news of a royal ball arrived at the house. It did not come with trumpets and banners, but in the form of a letter. The royal seal, a deep red wax, looked almost too heavy for the paper it rested on. Lady Aurelia broke it open at the breakfast table. Cinderella stood by with the teapot, watching the lines of her stepmother's face shift as she read. "A ball," Lady Aurelia murmured at last, testing the word on her tongue. In honor of the prince's return to the kingdom, every household of status is invited to send its eligible daughters. Celeste's eyes lit up at once. We must go! Portia sat straighter, her spoon pausing midway to her mouth. A royal ball? Imagine the gowns, the music, the potential, Lady Aurelia finished, her eyes glinting. Yes, this is an opportunity we cannot ignore. Cinderella's hands tightened slightly around the teapot handle, not from jealousy, but from the sudden, sharp ache of realizing how far away all of that was from her own life. A ball, music, a night where lanterns would shine like stars brought down to earth. Lady Aurelia glanced up, following the quiet in the room more than anything else. Her gaze landed briefly on Cinderella. You may set the table for 2 more at supper, she said. We'll need to discuss preparations. Cinderella nodded. Yes, stepmother. She did not ask if she might go. Not yet. The question felt too fragile, like thin glass she wasn't ready to risk dropping. In the days that followed, the house woke up. Dress patterns appeared on every surface. Bolts of fabric lay draped over chairs, shimmering in the daylight. Deep blues, dusky pinks, and rich emerald greens. Ribbons and lace spilled from baskets. The tailor visited, fussing with measurements and muttering about deadlines. Lady Aurelia supervised it all with quiet intensity. Celeste practiced curtsies in the mirror, testing smiles that hovered somewhere between charming and calculated. Portia pinned and unpinned her hair again and again, until the floor was scattered with hairpins like tiny fallen stars. Cinderella stitched hems and adjusted seams until her fingers were sore. Her reflection in the window glass looked pale and blurred, as if she were half faded from this life. One long afternoon, while Celeste and Portia argued in another room about which jewels would best catch the candlelight, Cinderella found herself alone with Lady Aurelia in the small sitting room that still smelled faintly of dust and rose oil. Her heart beat faster. She smoothed the fabric in her lap, then spoke. Stepmother. Yes? Lady Aurelia did not look up from her embroidery. I was wondering, Cinderella swallowed. The invitation said every household of status may send its eligible daughters. My father was a gentleman of the court. I am his daughter. Would it be possible for me to attend as well? For a moment, the only sound in the room was the soft scrape of Lady Aurelia's needle pulling through fabric. Then she lifted her head, her expression calm, almost kind, which made the words worse. My dear, she said, you are not a child anymore. You must learn to see things clearly. The world is not kind to women without dowries or connections. You are comfortable here, in a position that suits you. The ball is not for girls like you, it is for those with prospects. A small private pain tightened in Cinderella's chest. I understand, she said softly. Lady Aurelia's eyes flicked over her. Besides, someone must stay behind to tend the house. Do you imagine we would come home after midnight to a cold hearth and an empty kitchen? No, Cinderella murmured. Of course not. The conversation ended with the quiet click of her stepmother's attention returning to her embroidery. For everyone else, that was that. But hope is a strange thing. It does not always disappear when you tell it to. Sometimes it simply slips deeper beneath the skin. The evening of the ball arrived veiled in anticipation. Celeste and Portia talked all day, their excitement filling the air like static. Cinderella helped them dress, smoothing fabric, fastening clasps, arranging hair with careful fingers. You're pulling too tight, Portia complained. If I don't, it will fall loose, Cinderella replied gently. Tilt your head. There. Celeste stood before the tall mirror, studying herself. Do you think the prince will dance with me? She asked, more to her reflection than to anyone else. I think, Lady Aurelia said, entering the room like a quiet storm, that you will smile, listen more than you speak, and appear modest even when you are not. Cinderella stepped back and looked at them. For a moment she allowed herself to simply see the picture they made. 3 women in silk and jewels, gleaming like the world to which they believed they belonged. You all look beautiful, she said softly. Lady Aurelia glanced at her, eyes pausing on Cinderella's plain, work-worn dress. "Beauty is only part of it," she said. "But thank you. Now be sure to lay out a light supper for when we return, and tidy the hallway. I don't want to trip over any of your clutter in these shoes." "Yes, stepmother." They left in a rush of perfume and silk, the carriage wheels crunching on the gravel as they disappeared into the night. When the sound faded, the house fell into a silence that felt heavier than usual. Cinderella stood in the empty hall for a moment, listening to it. Then she did as she always did. She laid out bread and cheese, set the kettle ready, tidied the fallen ribbons and the last-minute clutter. The rooms seemed larger with only her in them, like a theater after the audience has gone home. Eventually she drifted back to the kitchen, drawn by habit to the familiar comfort of the fire. She took her usual place on the worn stool. But tonight the embers seemed dull. The warmth barely touched her. She thought of the ball, the lanterns, the music, the couples turning in wide circles. She imagined the prince, not as a shining storybook figure, but as a man perhaps just as tired and lonely as she sometimes felt, trapped under the weight of other people's expectations. What hurt most was not that she was missing a chance to dance with him. It was that, for one night, nearly everyone in the kingdom who mattered would be gathered together, laughing, talking, being seen. And she was here, alone, not seen at all. The ache pressed at her ribs until it became something sharp. She tried to swallow it, to tell herself she was being foolish, to remember her stepmother's words about girls like her. But she was so tired, tired of swallowing her own wants, tired of being grateful for so little. A single tear escaped before she could stop it. Then another. Soon they were slipping silently down her cheeks, warm trails against her skin. "I don't need a prince," she whispered to the quiet kitchen. "I only wanted one night. Just one." Her words faded into the soft crackle of the fire. For a while there was only silence and the steady ticking of the clock. Then very gently, the air in the room seemed to change. The candle flame on the table flickered, then straightened. A curl of ash rose from the grate and drifted not upwards, but sideways, as if caught in an invisible current. Cinderella blinked, frowning. "I must be more tired than I thought," she murmured. "That," said a warm, amused voice behind her, "is entirely true, but you are also more stubborn than tired, which is why we are having this conversation." Cinderella turned sharply. A woman stood in the middle of the kitchen. She had not been there a moment before, and yet she looked as if she belonged, as if the room had been waiting for her. She was older, but far from frail. Her hair was silver, piled in a loose knot. Her eyes were clear and bright, the pale color of winter sunlight. She wore a simple gray-blue gown with a shawl over her shoulders, and she carried with her the scent of rosemary and something like starlight. Cinderella's heart thudded. "Who are you?" she asked. The woman smiled. "A friend. Of your mother's once. Of yours now, if you'll have me. You may call me your godmother, if that makes it easier. Names matter less to me than timing, and you, my dear, chose a very dramatic moment to despair." "My godmother?" Cinderella repeated softly. "Yes." The woman's smile deepened. "You didn't think the world had entirely forgotten you, did you?" "Sometimes it feels that way," Cinderella admitted. "Grief and neglect can make even a bright room seem dim," the godmother said gently. "Sit down." Without quite understanding why, Cinderella obeyed. The godmother moved around the kitchen as if she'd known it for years, her hand trailing lightly across familiar surfaces. "You have worked hard," she said quietly, "harder than most would, in your place, and you have not let it turn you cruel. That matters." "Hard work is all I have," Cinderella replied. "No." The godmother's eyes met hers. "It is what you have been given. It is not all you are." Cinderella looked down, unsure what to do with such words. "Why are you here?" she asked at last. "Because you made a wish," the godmother said. "A simple one, a night of your own, And wishes like that echo, they call things to them. Her gaze softened. Your mother had the same habit. She asked me long ago that if you were ever lost in your own life, I should help you find your way back to yourself. Cinderella felt her eyes sting. I don't know who I am anymore, she whispered. I only know what they need me to be. Then we will start there, the godmother replied, with a single night that belongs to you. From there, perhaps we can build more. Cinderella shook her head, almost laughing through the remnants of her tears. Are you saying I can go to the ball? Yes. But I don't have a proper dress, Cinderella said, or a carriage, or shoes that wouldn't shame me on a palace floor. All of those are practical concerns, the godmother answered lightly. Practical concerns are surprisingly easy to solve. She stepped closer, studying Cinderella's face. Stand up. Cinderella rose, suddenly self-conscious. The godmother circled her slowly, humming under her breath. You have your mother's posture, she observed, when you're not trying to make yourself smaller. I've never thought about it, Cinderella said. Of course you haven't. The godmother stepped back. Very well, let's begin. She raised a hand, fingers curving in a slow, graceful motion. The air seemed to thicken, rich and warm. Cinderella felt something stir inside her, as if a quiet part of her that had been curled up for years was stretching at last. You have spent years being told you are less, the godmother said. Tonight I will only show you what was always there. The candlelight shifted, softening. Ashes in the grate shimmered like fine silver dust. Cinderella looked down as a gentle warmth flowed over her. Her plain dress trembled, the coarse fibers softening beneath her fingers. The fabric grew lighter, finer, as color washed through it from hem to neckline. A pale, luminous blue deepening into the soft shade of evening. Threads of silver appeared, woven subtly through the cloth like the quiet glimmer of distant stars. Her sleeves narrowed and lengthened, fitting gently to her arms. The neckline settled in a simple, elegant curve. The skirt fell in calm, graceful folds, neither too wide nor too narrow, made to move beautifully when she walked. She touched it, breath-catching. It felt soft yet strong, its beauty lying as much in its simplicity as in its detail. A gown not for a doll-like princess, but for a woman who had earned every breath of beauty she wore. Her hair loosened from its rough knot, lifting as if in a breeze. Strands coiled and settled into a new arrangement, half pinned, half free, with soft curls falling down her back and a few loose wisps framing her face. Her skin felt cool, her eyes clearer, as though she had finally rested. She opened her mouth to speak, then shivered as she felt something firm and cool form around her feet. She looked down. They would call them glass slippers later in stories. Clear and shining, they caught the light delicately. But they did not feel fragile beneath her. They were shaped perfectly to her feet, fitting as if they had been made from memory. I'll break them, Cinderella said automatically. I'm not used to delicate things. You underestimate yourself, the godmother replied. And my work. Cinderella shook her head in wonder. This is impossible. Improbable, the godmother corrected. Not impossible. But there are limits. Magic is not meant to carry the whole weight of a life. It can only open a door. At midnight, the spell will unravel. The gown, the shoes, the carriage, all will return to what they were. You must be home by then. Midnight. The word settled like a marker in Cinderella's mind. I understand, she said. Good. The godmother's voice softened. Remember, this night is not about catching a prince. It is about remembering that you exist, even when no one is looking. She moved to the back door and opened it. The garden lay quiet and shadowy. At the edge of the path, a pumpkin plant sprawled, with one large pumpkin still clinging stubbornly to its stem. You'd be surprised what can be done with things left to rot, the godmother murmured. She lifted her hands once more. The pumpkin shivered, then grew, its skin smoothing and deepening in color. It bulged and folded into a rounded carriage, gently gleaming, with curling lines along its sides like golden vines. Mice scurried from the hedges, whiskers twitching. The godmother smiled. You have been kind to all small things, she said, even when no one thanked you. They remember. With another quiet gesture, the mice became small, sturdy horses, their coats smooth and shining. Two lizards sunning themselves on a stone became footmen, blinking in surprise but standing straight. The old dog dozing by the gate stretched and transformed into a coachman with kind, puzzled eyes. Cinderella could not help but laugh, softly, in wonder. It's beautiful. It's appropriate, the godmother said. Beautiful is what others will call it. Now, off you go. The night won't slow itself for anyone. Cinderella gathered her skirt and stepped out into the cool air. The crystal shoes rang softly on the stone. She climbed into the carriage, heart fluttering like a bird on the edge of flight. As the carriage rolled away, she glanced back. Her godmother stood in the kitchen doorway, a small, satisfied smile on her face, light from the fire framing her in a warm halo. Then the house, and the life it held, slipped behind her, and the road to the palace opened ahead. The palace rose from the night like a dream made solid. Torches lined the long drive, their flames steady, casting pools of warm light over gravel paths and manicured lawns. Lanterns hung from the trees, each one a soft, glowing star brought down to earth. As the carriage approached, Cinderella saw other guests arriving in a swirl of color and excitement. Laughter and music floated out across the courtyard. When the carriage stopped, a footman opened the door. Cinderella stepped down, feeling the cool air brush her skin, the crystal shoes catching the light. No one stopped her. No one questioned her. She was simply another guest, another woman in a fine gown. Inside, the palace was bright and warm. Chandeliers glittered overhead. Mirrors caught the candlelight and multiplied it. The marble floor gleamed beneath her feet. She followed the flow of the crowd towards the source of the music. The ballroom was vast and full of movement. Couples turned and dipped, the skirts of their gowns sweeping in graceful arcs. Musicians played on a raised platform, their bows moving in a steady rhythm. Cinderella lingered near the edge of the room, a glass of pale, sparkling drink in her hand. The bubbles tickled her tongue. She let herself simply stand and breathe, listening and watching, in no hurry to be anything or do anything but be there. "Are you hiding?" a voice beside her asked, "or gathering your courage?" She turned. The man who had spoken was dressed more simply than some, but his clothes were fine, cut to fit him well. His hair was neatly combed, his jaw clean-shaven. There was something open about his face and something tired around his eyes, as though he had met too many people and truly known too few. "Perhaps both," Cinderella said. "It's a little overwhelming." "It is," he agreed. "I know people forget that, especially those watching from a distance. It looks like a celebration. It feels—" He shrugged lightly. "A bit like standing on a stage." "You don't enjoy that?" she asked. "The music, yes. The sense of being weighed and measured with every glance, not so much." His tone was light, but she heard the honesty beneath it. "Aren't we all weighed and measured?" Cinderella said quietly. "Some of us just don't have chandeliers overhead when it happens." He looked at her properly then, as if seeing past the gown and the hair. "That's an unusual way to look at it," he said. "At least for the people I usually meet at these things." "I'm not of the court," she replied. "Just of the kingdom." That seemed to amuse him. "A more interesting answer than most I've heard tonight." "Have you had many?" she asked. "Too many," he said with a small smile. "Most of them rehearsed." He paused. "May I know your name?" For a heartbeat she hesitated. Her name, as her step-family used it, felt full of ash and scorn. She thought of the way her father used to say it, soft and fond, and of the name hidden inside it. "Ella," she said at last. "My name is Ella." "Ella," he repeated, as if tasting the shape of it. "I'm pleased to meet you. I'm the prince," she finished gently, as pieces fell into place, the way people watched him out of the corners of their eyes, the small golden crest at his shoulder, the comfortable way he stood in this grand room. He raised an eyebrow. "You don't sound especially impressed." "You introduced yourself as a man," she said. "I thought it might be rude to change the subject." That surprised a real laugh out of him. warm and unforced. "You are very unusual, Ella." "So I've been told," she replied. He offered his hand, just slightly. "Unusual enough to dance with a stranger pretending to be ordinary?" She smiled. "I thought you were tired of pretense." "Ah," he said, "you've caught me out. Then let me be honest. I would very much like to dance with you. May I?" Her heart beat a little faster, but it was a pleasant quickening this time. "Yes," she said softly. "You may." He led her onto the floor with an ease born of practice, but he was careful, his hand at her back steady and respectful. The music rose and enveloped them. Her body remembered more than she expected. Her father teaching her in the parlor, laughing when she trod on his toes. The steps came back, tentative at first, then smoother as she trusted herself. 1, 2, 3, the prince murmured quietly, guiding, not pushing. "Let the music carry you. You don't have to fight it." She let herself lean into the rhythm. The room blurred into a wash of color and movement at the edges of her vision. For a while there was only the music, the floor beneath her feet, and the warmth of his hand. "You're very good," he said after a moment. "Better than some of my tutors." "I had an excellent teacher," she replied, though he did his best work in kitchens, not ballrooms. "Oh, wise man," the prince said softly. They fell into easy conversation between turns and steps. He asked whether she preferred morning or evening. She said she liked the quiet before dawn, when the world held its breath and nothing had happened yet. He said he preferred twilight, when the day asked, in its own silent way, "Did you use me well?" "Are you always honest with your days?" she asked. "Tonight," he said, more than usual. They danced longer than she realized. One song blurred into another. People noticed, of course. Eyes followed them. Murmurs spread through the crowd. But for a while it felt as if they were alone in a room full of people. At some point, Cinderella glanced up and saw the king and queen standing at the far end of the room. They watched their son, then her, with thoughtful expressions. Her stomach tightened. She looked away, suddenly aware of the borrowed magic in every fold of her gown. A large clock, high above the musicians, caught her eye. Its hands moved inevitably towards the 12. Time, which had felt soft and slow all evening, snapped back into focus. "How late is it?" she asked, her voice thinner than before. The prince followed her gaze. "Nearly midnight," he said. "Does the hour matter?" "Yes," she thought, "more than you know." "I have to go," she said, stepping back. "Now?" he asked, startled. "Have I said something?" "No," she breathed. "You've been kind. I cannot stay." The first toll of midnight rang through the hall, deep and resonant. She felt the magic inside her tremble, threads beginning to loosen. Panic flared. She dipped a quick curtsy. "Thank you for tonight," she said. "Truly." "Ella," he began, but she was already moving. The second chime sounded as she slipped from the dance floor. She wove through the crowd, skirts gathered in her hands, breath coming faster. People stepped aside, startled by her haste. The third chime rang as she reached the great staircase. She hurried down, shoes ringing on the stone. Near the bottom, she misjudged a step. One delicate shoe slipped free and tumbled to the floor, landing with a soft, chiming sound. She turned back, reaching for it, and felt the magic in her gown stutter. The fourth chime echoed. There was no time. With a small, pained sound, she left the shoe where it lay and ran out into the night, half-shod, the cool air rushing around her. By the time she reached the outer gate, the final stroke of midnight was fading. The change back was gentle, almost kind. Her gown sighed and softened, the fine fabric dulling and thinning, until it became her old, familiar dress once more. The remaining glass shoe dissolved into nothing around her foot, leaving her barefoot on one side, stockinged on the other. Behind her, the pumpkin carriage sagged and folded in on itself until it was once again only a pumpkin. The horses shrank into mice who scurried away into the hedges. The footmen and coachmen blinked and found themselves once more, lizard and dog, bemused but safe. Cinderella stood on the quiet road, breathing hard. The night felt huge, the palace lights distant. Her heart ached with a strange mixture of loss and wonder. She looked down at her plain dress, at her bare toes peeking from her old shoe. For a moment, shame whispered that she had never belonged there, that the night had been a lie. But beneath that, something steadier answered. She had danced in a palace. She had spoken with a prince as one person to another. She had been herself, and it had been enough. No magic could take that away. The walk home was long, the stones were cold beneath her feet, and the night air chilled her skin. But overhead the stars were clear and bright. When she finally slipped through the kitchen door, the house was still. Everything was as she had left it. The laid-out supper, the neat surfaces, the banked fire. The faint scent of rosemary lingered in the air, but her godmother was gone. Cinderella moved quietly around the room, adding wood to the fire, straightening what few things were out of place. Her body felt heavy with tiredness. Her mind replayed the evening, his laugh, the way he listened, the way he had looked as she ran. She sat at last on her familiar stool, feeling the rough stone against her back. This time sleep came quickly, and with it, a small, secret smile. The next day, the kingdom hummed with stories of the ball. In markets and courtyards, people talked of candlelit chandeliers, laden tables, and a mysterious young woman in blue who had danced with the prince for most of the night, then vanished at midnight, leaving behind only a glass shoe. At the palace, the prince held that same shoe in his hands, turning it thoughtfully. "It could fit any number of young women," one advisor said. "No," the prince replied quietly, "it won't." They argued, of course. It would take time, they said, to visit every household. It was a foolish, romantic gesture. It would be easier to choose from the many wealthy daughters he had met. But the prince remembered the way Ella had spoken about Dawn. He remembered the honesty in her eyes when she said she did not belong there. He remembered how it felt to be looked at as a man, not as a prize, so he insisted. The search began. By the time rumors reached Cinderella's town, people were already imagining that the prince would arrive at their own door, that his mysterious partner would turn out to be their sister, their cousin, their neighbor. In Cinderella's house, Lady Aurelia's eyes shone with calculation. "If the shoe fits either of you," she told Celeste and Portia, "it won't matter who he thought she was. He will have no choice." Cinderella listened in silence as she scrubbed the stairs. "Cinderella!" Lady Aurelia snapped from the doorway. "Stop dawdling. The prince could arrive any day. This house must be spotless." Cinderella obeyed, polishing floors and dusting corners, knowing with a deep, secret certainty that the prince would stand in this very room, with that very shoe, still looking for her. She slept fitfully, waking from dreams of running, of shoes crumbling to dust, of doors that would not open. Finally, on a clear afternoon when sunlight fell in long, clean stripes across the floor, there was a firm knock at the door. Cinderella was in the kitchen, hands in soapy water. At the sound, her heart seemed to pause. Upstairs, doors opened, footsteps hurried. Her stepfamily's voices rose in excited flutters. "Cinderella!" Lady Aurelia called sharply. "Come here at once." Cinderella dried her hands and wiped them on her apron. Slowly, she walked down the corridor to the sitting room and stopped just outside the doorway. The prince stood there. The glass shoe rested on a velvet cushion in the hands of an attendant. Guards waited just beyond the front door. Celeste and Portia sat primly, their shoes already off, toes pointed, faces full of hope and strain. Lady Aurelia's voice was smooth as cream. "Your Highness, what an honor. Please allow my daughters to try the shoe. I am certain one of them—" "Every eligible woman in the house will try it," the prince said politely, but with quiet authority. "Those were my instructions." "Of course," Lady Aurelia said quickly. "As you see, these are my daughters, the only girls of standing in the house." The prince's gaze moved slowly around the room, then settled on the figure in the doorway. Cinderella stood very still, framed by the shadows of the hall. "I was told," he said, his eyes never leaving hers, "that this house once belonged to a gentleman of the court who had a daughter of his own." Lady Aurelia's smile flickered. "You are well informed, Your Highness. Sadly, my late husband's daughter is more suited to housekeeping than to high company. We would not dream of troubling you by—" "But you must," the prince said gently. or give the impression that you refused a direct royal order. The room cooled a little. Lady Aurelia's jaw tightened. Cinderella, she said at last. Come in. The way she said the name still stung, but it no longer defined Cinderella. Not after everything. She stepped into the room. The prince's expression softened as he saw her properly. The dress was simple and worn, her hands roughened by work, her hair hastily pinned. But he recognized something underneath that had nothing to do with magic. The quiet strength, the wary honesty in her eyes. We meet again, he said, his voice low. Yes, Your Highness, she replied. Lady Aurelia's head snapped between them. You know each other? Briefly, he said. In a different room, with a different ceiling. The attendant stepped forward, lowering the cushion. Celeste tried first. She pushed her foot in firmly, but the shoe simply would not fit. Her feet are still swollen from dancing at the ball, Lady Aurelia said quickly. If you would permit, it cannot be forced, the prince answered. If it fits, it fits. If not, we move on. Portia took her turn. The shoe slid a little further, but not enough. Her foot was a different shape entirely. She pulled it back, cheeks flushed. Then it was Cinderella's turn. She sat down slowly, feeling lightheaded. She removed her worn shoe. Her foot felt smaller than ever in the cool air. The prince knelt in front of her. Gasps sounded around the room. Princes did not kneel to girls in old dresses. But he did, calmly, as if he had been waiting to do exactly this. May I? He asked. She nodded, unable to speak. He cradled her ankle gently, as though it were something precious, and lifted the glass shoe. It slid on, as if it had been made for her and her alone. No pinching, no pushing, just the soft, perfect meeting of shape and space. Silence fell over the room. Cinderella stared down at the shoe, blinking. It caught the light from the window and sent back a tiny spray of brightness across the floorboards. I knew it, the prince said softly. Lady Aurelia began to protest, words tumbling out about trickery and coincidence, but they sounded weak even to her own ears. The prince rose to his feet. Cinderella, he said, using her full name gently, as if it were something he wished to polish clean. Daughter of this house's former master. Will you walk with me? She looked around the room that had been her whole world for so long. The faded furniture, the polished surfaces she had cleaned 1,000 times. Her stepmother's rigid posture, her stepsister's shocked faces. I don't know how to be a princess, she said quietly. His eyes softened. Most days I don't know how to be a prince, he answered. Perhaps we could learn together. She almost laughed, a shaky, surprised sound. My world has been very small, she warned. Kitchens, gardens, firesides. And mine has been very narrow, he replied. Thrones, meetings, rituals. I think I would like your world very much. Cinderella thought of the night at the ball, of dancing, of talking, of feeling seen for the first time in years. She thought of her godmother's words. This night is not about catching a prince. It is about remembering that you exist. Now here he was, offering not a rescue, but a choice. She looked at his hand, held out to her, steady and patient. Then she took it. The days that followed were not the happily ever after endings told in simple tales. They were more complicated, more human. Cinderella moved to the palace. She had lessons in reading court documents, in speaking at formal gatherings, in understanding the subtle language of politics and power. Some days she felt like she was learning to walk all over again, in rooms full of people who expected her to stumble. At night, sometimes, she would wake and, for a second, expect to hear the creak of the kitchen door, the crackle of the small fire. Instead, she would hear the soft quiet of the palace, the distant footsteps of guards, the slow breath of Adrian, no longer just the prince to her, sleeping in his own chamber nearby. He struggled in his own ways. He had been raised to make decisions that pleased everyone and satisfied no one. He was used to hiding his doubts. Cinderella, with her practical honesty, did not allow him to disappear behind his title. You cannot fix a kingdom by smiling at it, she said one evening, as they sat together on a balcony watching the last light fade. No, he admitted. But sometimes it feels as though they only want my smile, not my thoughts. Then give them both, she replied quietly, and keep the truth of yourself for those who bother to ask for it. He smiled at that. Like you? Like me, she agreed. They did not marry straight away. They chose to wait, to let the kingdom get used to the idea of a future queen who had scrubbed her own floors, and to give themselves time to be certain of each other as more than a story told too quickly. Cinderella visited her old house once. Lady Aurelia was polite and strained, very carefully neither cruel nor warm. Celeste and Portia were quieter than before, their sharp edges worn down by the realization that the world did not owe them everything simply because they wished it. Cinderella did not visit to punish them or to brag. She came for a few small things of her father's, a book, a ring, a faded painting of her mother. As she left, Lady Aurelia spoke, almost against her own will. "You always were more than I knew what to do with," she said stiffly. Cinderella paused at the doorway. "I know," she replied gently. "I hope one day you'll let yourself be more than you've allowed to." Then she stepped out, leaving the house behind, not with bitterness, but with a quiet, settled heart. In the years to come, she built a new life. There were still kitchens, larger ones now, bustling with staff, but she was welcome there, greeted with smiles. There were still gardens, grander and more orderly, but she always found the quiet corners where wildflowers grew. There were still firesides, and she still loved to sit by them, wrapped in a shawl, remembering who she had been and who she was becoming. Sometimes late at night, when the castle was asleep and the moon cast pale light across the floors, Cinderella would slip out into the gardens alone. She would tilt her face to the stars, breathing in the cool air, feeling the same shy happiness she'd felt that first night she had dared to dream of something more. She was no longer simply the girl by the hearth, nor only the mysterious woman in the blue gown. She was both. She was all the versions of herself she had ever been. On certain nights, when the embers in the palace kitchen burned low and the air grew very still, she would catch a faint scent of rosemary and feel a warmth at her shoulder. "Well done," her godmother might have said, if she were there. "You found your way, after all." Cinderella would smile softly into the half-dark room and answer, in a voice full of quiet certainty, "Yes, I did." And the night would hold her gently, just as it had that first time she stepped out under the stars, knowing at last that her life belonged to her.